Hey, Sam here. How to avoid burnout and have electric energy as a driven dad. So this is one of the conundrums I think of dads when their kids don't sleep very well. They've got a really high stressful job that obviously or business that needs their attention, their focus, probably a lot of their energy as well. Um, and then, potentially getting home and kids and wife, get a good amount, but maybe not all of them. And so I speak to a lot of driven dads, and I've been here myself as well, where the energy is sort of a little bit up and down. Maybe in the afternoon, 2 p.m. ish, we get the energy dip, right? There's a bit of a slump, and it's just like, whoa, this wave of tiredness. And that even maybe forces these guys to put tasks off till tomorrow, right? When hopefully they'll have more energy. They maybe struggle to focus throughout the day. Now, some days are better than others, of course. Like, maybe we just happen to, as a miracle, wake up one day and feel amazing. But then the next day we're back to feeling a bit like, low in energy and tanked. But we struggle to focus, like maybe that's in the morning and we feel a bit distracted, we're checking emails more regularly or our notifications on our phone. Perhaps it's just in the afternoon when we get that energy slump and we have to rearrange tasks or meetings because we're not available. Probably again, I've sort of alluded to this already, but procrastinate on things. Like I was saying, these harder tasks, right? Um, and procrastinating on probably things at home as well. But I'd say more so stuff at work where it feels harder. So, oh, I'll just do this easier thing first, just to get me into the flow or whatever. And ultimately, we then end up just putting the other thing off because that other thing takes time because we procrastinate on that as well. Sometimes we're even actively procrastinating. So that could be looking like, oh, I just need to learn this or I need to go do this first, and that active procrastination doesn't have to be just sitting there doing nothing, right? It can be, I spent a lot of time procrastinating learning stuff, right? Now, learning is key, but there is a point where it becomes procrastination because you're not taking any action, right? And ultimately, like a lot of this can lead to irritability, like a short fuse, impatience, and it can lead to anxiety as well, right? Huge anxieties. Now, ultimately, the reason for this and the real problem, right? They're the stuff that we'll see manifest in our lives, but the real problem is because we're not ever switching off. We're struggling to switch off from work. Okay. We get home on an evening, and while we have done and do the playtime, the dinner time, the bath time, the bedtime with our kids, right? Read them stories and all that. We're only ever thinking of work. And potentially, maybe not in that moment, but afterwards, when we're supposed to be engaged with our wife, or potentially through dinner or whatever, we're just a little bit disengaged because we're continually thinking about work and maybe the challenges or the stresses or maybe what we haven't got done and what we have to do tomorrow. We're constantly thinking about those. And the thing is, right, if we're not careful, it's going to lead to us having constant fatigue, like a constant low energy and feeling lethargic. No, not just dips anymore, but that constant low energy. It's going to lead to us waking up feeling crap. So we're not waking up feeling energized. We're waking up hitting the snooze button multiple times and ending up late and rushing right in the morning routine. It's going to lead to brain fog. So, just kind of the inability to see stuff, the kind of memory loss potentially, uh, a loss of focus, a loss of concentration in our days, right? But more like complete loss, rather than it being good sometimes and not others. It's a complete loss of focus and concentration, a complete loss of direction and passion and meaning in life. They're huge. That's what this is ultimately going to lead to. That kind of lack of direction, um, which can start to make us question our lives, right? Everything in our life, not just work, but it can lead to question everything, and I've been there. I've had this last loss of direction, feeling lost in life. It can lead to depression or emotional detachment, like feeling nothing, feeling numb. It can lead to difficulty to self-motivate, right? Maybe that's for the gym or eating healthy, or just not watching TV or not doing stuff that you shouldn't. It can lead to disconnection from family and friends, right? And It can lead to poor decision making. And what I'm describing there is burnout. All of those things are burnout. And so ultimately, we start at some point with high energy, right? We then never able to switch off from work. So it kind of leads us to feeling those energy dips, this kind of struggling to focus, procrastination, the irritability, the anxiety, all these sorts of things. But over time, when we continue to do that, we're going to end up in burnout, especially if we've got nothing to overcome that. And so this is why, right? I'm going to explain why this happens. That was like surface level. I'm going to go deep here. So thoughts in and of themselves are very harmless. They are just words that we think in, I was going to say our brain, but we don't like, they're not actually, I don't think, part of the brain. But the problem is they trigger emotions, right? And so if you think back to a memory of childhood and it's a good memory, we're thinking about it, it will spark joy or happiness or whatever it was, right? But if we're thinking about something negative or stressful, it's going to bring about those emotions. So let's just say, like, give an example of work. If we forgot to do something at work that day, or forgot to send an email, or forgot to do this, that, and the other, and we can't actually do it in the moment because, we're doing the bedtime, bath time, whatever, then it's going to bring about a physiological response of stress. So we've had the thoughts. Now, a lot of people say thoughts are bad or thoughts are this, that, and the other. The problem is that then brings about, or it did for me anyway, like I shouldn't be having these thoughts because they're just, pointless, etc., etc. The problem is they're triggering emotions, and emotions are energy. Energy is the real thing that we need to, emotions are the real thing we need to handle. So never switching off from work brings about this stress response, right? It's going to bring about these feelings of stress because ultimately we're not switched off about, if work was going well or we were doing everything we were supposed to, we'd probably be pretty switched off when we got home, right? But it could be just anxieties about what we're going back to tomorrow. You get that post-holiday or Sunday anxiety. It could be just feelings of you forgot to do something, right? And you can't change at that moment, so you're just getting stressed about it. And this isn't in and of itself bad again, right? Short term. Stress isn't a bad thing short term. The problem is now, we're going to probably have this elevated for a while because we're starting to never switch off every single day. And so it leads to the central nervous system being overloaded, overworked. So we're kind of taxing the system, which is our body, right? We're taxing this, um, the system. And because we're constantly overworking it, we're in this state of chronic stress. So this chronic have never been able to switch off. Okay. And the thing about that is it leads to the fight or flight response being constantly switched on, which, as a natural evolution of where we are, right? That like animals have this, we have it, and it serves us very, very well. But when we're constantly elevating this position, so let's just say, we're always thinking about work, when we're at home, when we're at work, whatever, or business, then we're never switching off from this fight or flight, okay? Because we're in this chronic state of stress. Like I said, unless it's a really positive thing, but I doubt that's why it's happening. So it means that we never enter the rest and digest response. So that's like the opposite. And this, of course, then will drain our energy because we're not, rest and digest is ultimately, as it says, resting, right? Of course, we're talking about digest as well, right? But let's just focus on the rest. We're focusing in that time. Your body's focused on resting, recovering, allowing a sort of anabolic state, this kind of building and creating inside. Whereas, fight or flight is ultimately switching things off because it's a stress, right? It's a stress response. It dulls down digestion and all these other things, and over time, obviously, they're going to have huge effects. And I'm not going to talk about the sort of biological effects of all this, right? But I want to talk about what it is really for burnout. But it's draining our energy, right? And then one of the problems is because we're sort of drained in energy every day, and again, this starts out small but builds over time. we're going to need more dopamine hits because ultimately dopamine is a thing that makes us feel better, right? It's a release in the brain that makes us feel better. And so we probably then need more things like our phones, right? So checking notifications or potential emails or whatever, anything that's going off, or games, for example, anything that's going to give us a feel good factor in that moment. Uh, More junk food because again, that releases good feelings in that moment. Maybe porn, right? Because again, it's doing the same thing. And social media, as an example, seeing notifications on social media, or on, of course, on our phones in general, our dopamine response. Like this is all researched by these apps, these social medias to make it not only addictive, but also like to release the dopamine response, right? And then ultimately you want to go back on their app or you want to stay on their app, okay? And you'll keep going back and back and back for more and more. But ultimately, it's going to be hollow in the end, right? And the problem is, right, this then leads to more stress, more feelings of low mood and bad energy and all this sort of thing, because ultimately your brain has to balance it out. So I don't want to go into too much depth about the dopamine response because I've done that in other videos you can go watch. But basically, like when we have the high level of pain, dopamine, when we release dopamine straight away, your brain needs to balance it out. So it's going to increase the pain response, right? And not pain as in ow, but pain as in the low mood, the stress, the feeling of low energy, that sort of thing, right? And ultimately, it doesn't just do that, it actually exaggerates it. So you're going to end up in more pain. And this is the point, right? Which then means you need more dopamine hits, which then means more pain. And we end up in this loop and cycle. And again, never being able to switch off from work is going to drain your energy. Drained energy, we need more things to make us feel better. Ultimately, everything is making us feel worse and we're going to end up in burnout. So what can you actually do to avoid this, right? Or change it if you feel like you're in that moment now? Well, as you may have guessed, we need to enter the rest and digest, right? And we need the ability to do this, not just on holiday, right? A good symptoms, whether you're accessing this all the time, is if you go on holiday and you feel so tired all the time, people say that that's normal, but it's not. It's because we're sort of always wired, we're always scattered, we're always constantly going after stuff in daily life, and then we get on holiday, and your body just completely goes, "Whoa, what's happened?" and just shuts down everything. Um, so what we need to do is access that more often on a daily basis, if I'm honest, and be able to access that. Stress isn't a bad thing, this fight or flight, it can get us through some great moments, not just for us, it's, um, evolution standpoint, not just from survival, but also like from daily life, right? It's not a bad thing to kind of access it for deep work and focus, but ultimately we need to be able to come down from it. And so the next problem is because we need to enter this a little bit more and, figure out how we can do that and go into rest and digest. As you might know, that like and have guessed by now, we need to rest more. But it's not just any rest, right? And I'm going to go through this in a second. It's I'll talk about this later on, properly about what rest you actually need to get. It's not about sitting in front of the TV. That's not true rest. That's more dopamine hits. But the next problem with this is time, right? As a driven dad, you've got work, which is full time, if not more. You've got then dad duties, which takes up the rest of the time. Let's be honest. Maybe you see your mates every now and again, twice a year or something. You probably see more than that, but you get what I'm saying, right? It's just so busy between all of this that how do we actually get time to rest, right? How do we actually find the time to rest? Um, the thing is, what I want you to understand is managing time is not the answer. It's, it's foundational. We all should be managing our time. But ultimately, that's not going to give you any of this back. That just by creating time, of course, we're going to need to create time, right? We're going to need to create time back. And, don't get me wrong, we need some level of time management and gaining space in our weeks to be able to do this, right? But for me, it's not just about time management. We have to do this as well instead. But just before getting to that, I just want to say, by the way, like I do help driven dads do this. So I help then reclaim 10 plus hours a week through my dopamine reset system, um, which basically, we look at how to create dopamine properly. We look at all of this in more depth, how you can actually reclaim 10 hours so you can focus more during the day, so you can have more energy, and so you can have more time. Of course, it says that there, right? So if you're interested in reclaiming 10 hours in your week, but doing it properly, not just reclaiming 10 hours and then doing nothing with it, spending intentional time, doing things on purpose that serve your life, that give you more energy, that give you more purpose, more meaning, so you can step into your full potential, right? So you can become the high performing dad. Well, just hit the link below in the description or just DM me. Like, I'll make sure I'll put something in the description below just so you can hit it. And you can see how you can do that. But the next level to going back to time management, that's the first level. The next level is sage level. Definitely. This is like huge. So pay attention. It's to manage your energy, not your time, but your energy. Because of this reason. And if you don't believe me, just hang on 2 seconds. Just hear me out. I'll explain why, right? Because I probably wouldn't have believed myself a few years back. But imagine back to a time recently, hopefully, where you had high energy, when you had a real big, good day of energy, right? If you can, if it's safe to, or you're not in some random public place, close your eyes and just think back to that time. Try and imagine it again, or a time where you last felt this way at least. What were you feeling in that moment? Obviously high energy, but what else? Was there happiness, was there joy, gratitude? What were you feeling? Let's just say, hopefully this was a full day of energy. What were your actions like? What did you eat? Did you train or do some exercise? How were your decisions all the day? How was your work? How was your time when you were back at home with family? Maybe this time was on holiday, right? Which says a lot to me. How was your motivation levels? How was everything in your life? This, hopefully you're imagining something that's so much better, right? You can open your eyes, by the way. But hopefully that little small visualization, everything comes from a place of energy. And that is 100% my belief, because I've been on both sides. I've been on the lethargic side and I've been on the energy side. And I know when I'm energetic, I eat better. My workouts are better. I'll always work out, but they're better. My decisions are better. My work's better. I'm not distracted. I can easily say no to distractions and keep my boundaries. I can have good conversations with my wife and deep conversations. I can be more present for my son. I can have a great time with my mates that doesn't involve alcohol or whatever. And so this is why we need to be high energy, right? Because everything else ends up better. And of course, we're going to end up with more focus, which means better productivity, which means less work thoughts after when you take them home. Because we've done more work, we're satisfied with the work we've done. And this is the key here, right? Actually, if we focus more during the day, and this is why the dopamine reset, I've created this, because if we focus more during the day at work, we're going to have and get more work done. We don't need supplements, we don't need to use willpower or anything like that. If we have more focus, we then will be able to get more work done. By the time we come home, the thoughts of work or business have gone, because we've switched off, knowing that we've done everything we needed to that day, and we've got a plan for tomorrow, and we just action it. So here's an example of this. One of the high performing dads inside the program, named Jay. I can't say his real name just because I haven't actually asked him that I could put this in here. But he's a business owner. He has a family, 3 kids, 0 time, and burnt out when he first came to me. He was completely knew he needed to do something, but didn't know what and didn't know how, of course. Knew he needed a change because he couldn't carry on the way he was carrying on. Like, there was ultimately going to be a point, and he had all those symptoms I was talking about earlier of burnout. Um, he managed his time and he tried to keep a balance, to be a good dad, to be a good husband with his family life. So it wasn't overtaking his life, but that in and of itself put more stress inside the business and on his family life because he was constantly thinking about each of them inside each one. When he was at work, he felt a bit guilty. When he was with family, he felt a bit guilty, right? And this added more stress and strain. And over time, it led to these symptoms of burnout. And he knew something needed to change. So what we implemented together was we started to manage his energy, and we added rest and energy giving tasks. And again, we did it in the right way. I'll tell you about how to do that in a second. He became more calm and centered in general day life. So he was less irritable with his family. He can handle anything that comes from that, as you know, from kids. And by the way, he had a baby, just had a baby, like not long after starting to work together. Um, he's handled some of the toughest times in his life. I can't go through those, but he has. Trust me, these are big, big challenges. Um, without burning out again. He's had more time physically for his family and mentally because now his work stays at work. He can switch seamlessly. Like one of the downfalls about working from home, if you've ever worked from home, you'll know like it's where's the switch, right? But he's been able to allow work to stay at work. So he managed to do all that in quite a short space of time. And this was just by implementing. Of course, there was more to it, and there's more to his journey. But one of the big things that impacted him was learning to manage his energy through the energy creator, which is actually part of the dopamine reset. So how can we do it? Here's the thing. There's 3 steps. Number 1 is, first of all, know how it feels like, or know what it feels like, I should say, when energy is best. So we kind of had a little visualization there. But what was it like when your energy is the best? How do you feel? What do you do? All those sorts of things. And then that's our standard marker to base everything else off. We need to know this before we can do anything else. Because if we don't know this, we can't do the next 2 steps. So you've got to know what it looks like, or what you'd like it to be, right? This is where we want to be all the time. Number 2, know what it feels like when this is starting to slip. So ideally, we want to catch ourselves here so we can get back to our highest energy as soon as possible. Because it's much easier to nip something in the bud than it is to allow it to flower. I don't know where I'm going with this analogy, but allow it to flower and have to, completely trim it off or overhaul and start again. Ultimately, it's what's going to be required in burnout. Number 3, what is it like in burnout? I've already gone through these symptoms, but if you allow yourself to get here, what's needed to get back on top form? So when you're in that bad stage again, we don't want to do it, but we want to have it as a just in case because we want a plan. This is the key thing here. You need to create a plan around, knowing what the best is, but then when it's slipping, so hopefully we can catch ourselves then and get ourselves back to what the best is. I like to say like green, orange, and red. So green's the best, orange is slipping. So we need to know how to then, and the steps and the protocols we need to put in place to then get it back up into green, right? Into our best energy. But ultimately, sometimes we may not know, or we may be going through this time where it's just not possible to do that. And so we might end up in red, which is the burnout zone, right? And so if we do end up there, obviously the steps from orange to green are quite small in comparison to red to green, right? We're going to need some big, big steps to get back from there. So what are the protocols? What do we need to do to get back from red to green? And that's what you just got to figure out, right? And this is the thing. And if you can do that, if you can start managing your energy like this, then you are 100% going to avoid burnout. But you're also going to have Of course, more energy, right? Which means more focus, more productivity. We're also going to have more time back because ultimately we're more focused and more productive. So we're getting more done in less time, which means that we can do whatever we want with that time. This is how we reclaim those 10 plus hours, sort of. But if you want the true system, again, just look below in the link. That's what it's there for. But there is a few more steps to it, of course. But when we manage energy, we're constantly high. We're making better decisions daily. We're doing better things, taking better action. We've got better feelings, right? We're more joyful and more grateful. Um, we're less irritable. We're more patient. And of course, these are all amazing things when it comes to being a dad, being a husband, and also a, a driven man who wants success, right? And so that's going to be the key thing. When we just manage our time, it's great. We might be able to get decent stuff done, but we need what's the quality within those tasks? If you set 2 hours aside to do a piece of work and you're not high energy, what's the quality going to be like? As opposed to if you set 2 hours aside to do this work, but you're high energy, what will then the quality be like, right? We don't just need to think about literally the logistics of our time. We need to start thinking about what that time, how we're acting within that, and that all comes from energy.